What if a detective investigating a series of brutal murders was secretly the killer behind them all, and his crimes were so twisted that even hell had to judge him? Detective Sean thought he was carrying out God's will, but when his investigation leads him straight into the hands of Pinhead, he discovers that even heaven and hell have their own plans for him. Hey everyone, welcome back to Midnight Recaps. Tonight's nightmare is Hellraiser, Judgment 2018. The movie opens in hell, where Pinhead and the Auditor are discussing how humanity has changed. Pinhead explains that technology has advanced to the point where people can satisfy their desires in ways that didn't exist before. Lust can now be indulged electronically, so perhaps a simple wooden puzzle box isn't enough to attract people anymore. The Auditor tells him that they already have a solution. There is a mechanism available and the house is ready. They can adapt. He points out that human nature hasn't really changed. Greed is still greed. Lust is still lust. People still lie, betray each other, and give in to their darkest desires. The Auditor agrees. The new millennium may be moving forward, but morality seems to be going in the opposite direction. More and more people are looking for darker experiences, and that gives the Inquisition plenty of souls to work with. So they decide to begin with people who have already embraced their worst instincts. One of their first targets is Carl Watkins. Watkins is a local offender, a flasher and a distributor of child pornography. He's exactly the kind of person the Stygian Inquisition would consider worthy of attention. One day, Watkins receives a mysterious letter. The message tells him that they know what he's done, that they understand him, and that they can help him. He is instructed to come to 55 Ludovico Place immediately and, most importantly, to come alone. Watkins follows the instructions. When he arrives, the Auditor welcomes him and tells him that they have something to show him. Watkins walks inside. The Auditor then knocks him unconscious. When Watkins wakes up, he's strapped to a chair inside the Stygian Inquisition's domain in hell. The Auditor tells him to look around. For now, he's simply a captive. If they wanted to kill him, they would have already done it. Instead, they want to hear his thoughts, understand his desires, and determine whether he's worthy of a special reward. Watkins asks how they could possibly know so much about him. The Auditor tells him that his criminal record was essentially his resume. The Auditor begins his interview by asking about August 18, 2001, when Watkins lured a young girl named Courtney Redison into his car. Watkins admits that he had seen her at a playground before and couldn't control himself. After answering all the questions, Watkins asks about his reward. The Auditor tells him that he must first meet the assessor. The process is disgusting. The assessor pours a bottle containing children's tears over Watkins' records and consumes the pages. Eventually, even the assessor becomes sick and vomits the material through a tube leading to the jury. The jury examines what they've received and reaches its decision. Watkins is guilty. He's taken away to be cleaned before meeting the surgeon. His punishment involves being chained down while the jury strips him and prepares him for what comes next. The surgeon arrives carrying a large metal scraper. Watkins' skin is cut and eventually ripped away from his face. The story then moves back to Earth. A young woman named Crystal Lanning arrives at her apartment. She immediately notices candles burning inside. She calls out, but nobody answers. Her dog is also missing. When she tries the light switch, nothing happens. Before she can investigate, someone emerges from the darkness and stabs her. Crystal falls to the floor and asks her attacker what he wants. He tells her that he wants to make an example out of her. Then he kills her. Later, detectives David and Sean arrive to investigate. A message has been written in Crystal's blood. I am a jealous god. The detectives recognize it as the work of the Preceptor, a serial killer whose murders are based on the 10 Commandments. Detective Edgerton arrives at the crime scene and introduces herself, telling them that she has been assigned to the investigation. Sean then checks her badge to confirm her identity. She examines the crime scene and immediately notices that the Preceptor has followed his usual style. The message refers to the commandment about having no other gods. Then the detectives notice movement inside Crystal's body. They investigate and discover her missing dog. It has been placed inside her. The murder is clearly another twisted interpretation of biblical punishment. The next day, The detectives review the Preceptor's previous crimes. One earlier case involved Jessica and Stephen, two lawyers who were accused of lying. The Preceptor cut out both of their tongues with an electric turkey knife and allowed them to bleed to death in front of their son, Michael. He then put their tongues into a blender, mixed them with bleach, and forced the mixture into the boy's mouth. His reasoning was that the parents made a living feeding lies to people, so their son should be forced to taste those lies. The detectives also examine a letter from the Preceptor. Forensics have found almost nothing useful. No fingerprints, no oil, no residue, no glue. The only real clue is that it was typed on an old manual typewriter. Edgerton asks whether the word Preceptor is connected to the Freemasons. Sean explains that the term is used by Freemasons, but it is much older. A preceptor is a teacher or someone responsible for upholding a law or tradition. And in this case, that tradition is the 10 Commandments. The detectives continue examining another crime scene. 4 victims have been killed and their hands positioned around bottles of blood. The Preceptor has left a message identifying them as thieves. When Edgerton examines one of the victims' palms, she finds an eyeball and a tooth. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. At this point, the detectives understand that the Preceptor isn't randomly selecting victims. He's matching their supposed sins to his own twisted interpretation of biblical punishment. Back at the station, the detectives begin going through the identities of the victims. Most of them have criminal records, but nothing particularly serious. Then David asks Sean for the name of one of the victims. Nicole Punna. David searches the name and finds a connection to Carl Watkins. Watkins is already familiar to the police. He's a local offender, a flasher and a distributor of child pornography. They've arrested him several times, but he has always managed to plead out, make a deal, or provide information to avoid serious consequences. The detectives also discover that several of the girls connected to Watkins attended Terrace Academy. The school eventually placed a restraining order against him after he was repeatedly caught loitering around the school and watching the girls. Crystal Lanning had also attended Terrace Academy several years earlier. Now Watkins looks like a very important part of the investigation. David and Sean visit his apartment. The landlady tells them that Watkins hasn't been home for several days. She lets them inside. The apartment looks abandoned. While searching, they find a newspaper article about the Preceptor and another envelope, but the letter inside is missing. And just like the Preceptor's other messages, it's been typed on an old manual typewriter. They take it back to the lab as evidence and put out an alert for Watkins. David then asks Edgerton to go with him and check some of the usual suspects. But Sean isn't convinced they've found everything. He returns to Watkins' apartment and searches it again. This time, he finds Watkins' laptop. Sean checks the browsing history and discovers a location Watkins had previously searched. It's the exact address written in the letter. Rather than waiting for backup, Sean goes there alone. He arrives at the house and knocks. Someone opens the door. Sean is immediately hypnotized and loses consciousness. When he wakes up, he's strapped to a chair inside the Stygian Inquisition. The auditor tells Sean that he's a man of considerable interest to them. Sean understands that if they wanted him dead, they wouldn't have bothered keeping him alive. So he asks what they want. The auditor says that he's correct. Then Sean asks what he knows about Carl Watkins. The auditor describes Watkins as a man of impeccable taste, apparently with a bit of sarcasm. Sean then asks about the Preceptor, but instead of answering, the auditor asks Sean the same question. Sean looks around and notices several mysterious boxes. He asks what they are. The auditor explains that they're linking mechanisms between the human world and theirs. They provide judgment and redemption to anyone who opens them. They can bring death, rebirth, lust, hatred, sensation, and countless other experiences. Then the auditor begins questioning Sean about his own life. He asks Sean when he first heard something. Sean remembers being 4 years old. His family had a pet dog, and one day he hit it. But the auditor keeps asking questions. Sean eventually talks about his military service. When he was 25, he shot a man. The bullet struck the man's throat, and Sean watched him die. He also remembers killing 2 children with a grenade. The auditor points out that Sean was a soldier. He was permitted to carry out those actions. But he wants to know what Sean allowed himself to feel after doing them. Sean says he was doing his job. The auditor believes that Sean is carrying guilt that he has never dealt with. He tells Sean that the Inquisition can purge that guilt. Then the auditor summons the assessor. Sean's life is recorded on pages, just as Watkins was. The assessor begins consuming them, but almost immediately, something goes wrong. The pages choke him. The assessor struggles, becomes sick, and eventually vomits the contents into the tunnel leading to the jury. The jury suffers the same reaction. The auditor is surprised by what he's seeing. He goes to Pinhead for advice and explains that Sean's answers have overwhelmed both the assessor and the jury. Pinhead considers the possibility that Sean may actually be innocent. But by then, Sean has already been sent to the cleaning room. The jury begins preparing him for punishment. They tear away his clothes and gather their saliva in a container before forcing him to drink it. Sean struggles against them. Eventually, he manages to break one of his hands free. While the auditor deals with the situation, he discovers something else. One of the mysterious boxes is missing. Sean has taken it. Back in the real world, Sean calls David and tells him to bring his gun. He drives David to the house without explaining what happened. They search every room, but there's nothing. The house is completely empty. David becomes frustrated. He tells Sean that he's barely spoken to him over the last few days and that he's worried. They're partners, but Sean is behaving like a completely different person. Sean doesn't explain. He simply walks away. That night, Sean returns home and pours himself a glass of wine. When he goes to sleep, he has a disturbing nightmare. The Cenobites appear and force a black mask over his face. They pour a strange substance over him. Sean wakes up screaming. His wife Allison tries to calm him down. Sean admits that he doesn't understand what's happening anymore. Allison tells him that the case is destroying him. The two try to comfort each other and become intimate, but Sean starts seeing disturbing visions again. He panics and leaves the house. Outside, he realizes that someone is following him. Before he can react, the person attacks him and knocks him unconscious. The next day, David and Edgerton discuss Sean's behavior. David admits that Sean has become distant and unpredictable. Edgerton asks whether Sean ever experienced PTSD after returning from the military. David says not that he knows of. Sean has never really talked about what happened during his tours. She asks whether he drinks or uses drugs. David explains that Sean used to drink but had been sober. Edgerton explains that she's been assigned to the case for two reasons. One is to help catch the Preceptor. The other is to evaluate Sean because there are concerns about his behavior. David doesn't like the implication that his partner might be a problem, but Edgerton tells him it's a genuine concern. Later, David receives a call from Allison. Sean is in trouble again. David finds him drunk and looking completely worn out. He takes him home and gives him coffee. Sean explains that he and Allison had an argument and that he started drinking again. David tells him nobody is judging him. Sean responds, "Only God can judge me." He then quotes scripture about God judging both the righteous and the wicked. Sean leaves to clean himself up. David stays behind and notices a copy of A Tale of Two Cities. When he opens it, he finds two lines marked, "It was the reason of darkness," and "It was the winter of despair." David remembers the Preceptor's letter. Contained almost the exact same phrases. The letter described bringing the wrath of the Almighty and becoming the plague of retribution, the season of darkness and the winter of despair. David photographs the marked passages and takes them to Edgerton. Now the connection to Sean is becoming harder to ignore. But before they can question him, Sean enters the office. His phone rings. It's the medical examiner, who tells them they found Crystal Lanning's cell phone inside her body. Edgerton decides to go with Sean to the medical examiner while David stays back at the office to go through the evidence. At the medical examiner's office, they discover that the phone still works. Investigators manage to power it up and find that Crystal had been using a GPS application before her death. More importantly, the location where her body was found wasn't her last location. Her phone contains the address of where she had actually gone. Sean and Edgerton immediately head to the address. The address leads them to a warehouse, where they force their way inside. The place is filled with equipment, photographs, and information about the Preceptor's victims. After everything they've been investigating, they've finally found the killer's base of operations. A section of one wall is covered by a red sheet. Before they can properly examine it, Edgerton receives a message from David. While she's distracted, Sean pulls the sheet away. Behind it is a photograph of Allison and David together. Edgerton immediately realizes that Sean has been hiding something. Before she can react, Sean attacks her and knocks her unconscious. A short time later, David arrives at the warehouse. Sean ambushes him and takes his gun. David tells him that backup is already on the way. Sean calmly tells him that they're not. Then he tells David to move to the center of the room. Sean is confused about how David figured out that he is the Preceptor, but he eventually asks the question that matters most. How did David figure it out? David explains that Sean gave himself away. Earlier, when David told Sean that no one was judging him, Sean replied, "Only God can judge me. God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man." That sentence stayed with David. He searched the quotation and eventually came across Ecclesiastes, one of the books of the Hebrew Bible. But the important part was the meaning of the word. Teacher, preacher, preceptor. Suddenly, all the pieces came together. The name, the commandments, the biblical references, the letters, the murders. Sean was the preceptor. And the disturbing part is that Sean doesn't see himself as a murderer. He believes he's carrying out God's judgment. Every victim, in his mind, has committed a sin, and every murder is simply the punishment he believes they deserve. Then Allison arrives. Sean forces her to stand beside David. He explains why he's angry with her. While Sean was away on his first military tour, Allison cheated on him with a man she met online. Sean considered this a violation of the commandment against coveting another man's wife. So he killed the man. He cut off his eyelids and burned him alive inside his own car. Sean wasn't surprised that Allison had betrayed him. What really disappointed him was David for having an affair with his wife. He expected more from his partner. Sean then forces David and Allison to sit facing each other. He brings out the strange box he took from the Stygian Inquisition, the Lament Configuration. He forces them to solve it together. They manipulate the puzzle until it opens. The room immediately changes. Chains begin moving through the air, and a portal opens. Pinhead appears. The auditor is there as well. Pinhead looks at Sean and tells him that he knew he would eventually find his way back to them. After all, evil has a way of finding evil. Sean knows that hell is now coming for him, so he tries to bargain. He offers David and Allison's lives in exchange for his own freedom. But Pinhead refuses. David and Allison will be punished for opening the box, but Sean has his own crimes to answer for. He's the Preceptor. He's murdered innocent people. He's tortured them, and he's deliberately twisted the 10 Commandments to justify his actions. There will be no deal. Sean then tries to use the box to escape, but instead of opening a way back to Earth, chains and hooks tear into his hands, restraining him. Pinhead tells him that the jury has already found him guilty. Sean's audit is even worse than Watkins. The pages are filled with so much guilt that they made the assessor choke. Pinhead tells Sean that he will be cleaned, then handed over to the surgeon. When the surgeon and the butcher finish with him, he'll be reborn into an eternity of agony. But before Sean can be taken away, someone else enters the scene. An angel. Her name is Jophiel, and she demands Sean's release. Pinhead and the auditor are surprised by her arrival. Jophiel explains that Sean is actually part of Heaven's plan. His murders weren't entirely outside their knowledge. They allowed him to operate because his actions served a purpose. Sean was essentially being used as a wolf among humanity. His brutal murders were intended to terrify sinners and push them toward God. The auditor struggles to accept this. How can something so evil possibly serve heaven? Jophiel explains that good and evil are connected. Heaven discovered that controlling evil sometimes requires becoming involved with evil. So Sean's victims were considered acceptable losses. It's a disturbing revelation because it means Sean wasn't completely wrong about one thing. There really was a larger plan. He was just never told the full truth. Jophiel tells Sean to continue his work. He has heaven's blessing. But she also makes something clear. He isn't forgiven. He's still a murderer and a sadist. His actions are simply useful to heaven at this moment. Eventually, he'll face judgment. For now, however, Jophiel orders Pinhead to release him. Pinhead reluctantly obeys. Sean is sent back to Earth. But his return doesn't go the way he expects. The moment he materializes inside the warehouse, Detective Edgerton wakes up, and she shoots him dead. She immediately calls for backup. The Preceptor is finally finished. But the consequences of what happened in Hell are just beginning. Back in the Stygian Inquisition, Jophiel confronts Pinhead. She's angry because she believes he deliberately sent Sean back to Earth knowing that he would likely be killed. Jophiel tells Pinhead that he will suffer for what he has done. But Pinhead doesn't take that word lightly. Suffer. He tells her that she doesn't understand what suffering really is. Suffering isn't something Pinhead simply experiences. It's what he has devoted his existence to. Pinhead tells Jophiel that perhaps she should learn more about the things she claims to control. But Jophiel refuses to back down. The argument quickly turns violent. Pinhead summons his chains and uses them to restrain her. He drives nails into her forehead and asks what she intends to do now. Jophiel simply tells him to do his worst. Pinhead responds by sending more chains toward her. They tear into the angel and rip apart her face. It's a brutal moment, but it also becomes the biggest mistake Pinhead makes. Until now, Pinhead has been acting as an agent of hell. But killing an angel is different. He's crossed a line, and heaven responds. God strips Pinhead of his Cenobite powers. The supernatural abilities that made him one of Hell's most powerful servants are taken away. He's banished from Hell and forced to live as a mortal human being. And that's where the story ends. If you made it this far, you clearly enjoy horror recaps. Subscribe so you don't miss the next terrifying story. What did you think of this movie? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're craving another terrifying story, tap the video on your screen right now. Trust me, you don't want to miss this one.